Hello everybody, I'm Silly. This will be part 12, chapter 12 of Susurrus of the Subdued, SOS. Katsuki pushed his seat back, moist palms sticking to the cheap wood. It scraped against the floor, the noise barely audible in the already clamorous room. However, to the boy, it was ear-splitting. It reverberated through his bones, ringing within his ears, and traveling up through his hazy mind. He mindlessly sat down, the wood creaking beneath him as it adjusted to his weight. The classroom was one loud buzz of noise, filtering in one ear before swiftly flying out the other. Ever since Katsuki found out about Deku going missing, his mind felt foggy and unfocused. It was like he was completely lost in his thoughts, drowning in a raging sea that seemed to pull him under just as he felt as though he could breach the surface. His body felt weighed down, the shackles of his mind wrapped tight around his ankles. They held him underwater, drowning him just inches from the surface. All the boy could focus on was trying to release his binds, to break the chains that forced him to breathe in nothing but cool liquid. It was suffocating, not being able to concentrate. After all, how was Katsuki supposed to be the best if he couldn't even focus on his surroundings? The explosive teen blinked as he felt pressure on his shoulder. He turned, and his eyes locked onto one of his classmates. It took Katsuki far longer than it should have to register that it was one of the guys that followed him around. Nagai Teseki, or Fingers, as Katsuki deemed him, had a hand on his shoulder and a light smirk on his face. "You hear about Midoriya last night? He's all over the news." The extra questioned, removing his hand. The boy moved over to Katsuki's desk, sitting atop it as he continued. "I think he ran away. Probably trying to get attention or something." The ashy blonde narrowed his eyes at his classmate. Usually, he wouldn't mind talking shit about the nerd. But what Tesekai was saying right now just pissed Katsuki off. "Would you shut up?" The crimson-eyed boy bit out, shoving his hands into his pockets roughly. "Your damn voice is hurting my ears." Nagai raised a brow at the other boy before he was shuffling off of the desk. He stood beside the explosive teen, confused look unwavering. "I thought you'd be a lot happier now that the quirkless freak is gone. What's up with you, man?" Tsk. Katsuki hissed through his teeth, aggressively turning his head away from the other. "None of your damn business." Tesekai just looked at him for a long time, debating whether or not to question his classmate further. However, he wasn't able to come to a solid decision, as Morikuro, the other boy that usually tailed Katsuki, walked over with a large grin plastered onto his face. "Did you guys hear about Deku?" He spoke before Nagai had the chance to warn him. However, Kuro was shutting his mouth soon enough as Katsuki finally vaporized a lingering sweat on his palms. The room that was once filled with the sound of chattering students was replaced with the familiar boom of a quirk-powered explosion. The smell of burnt caramel followed soon after. The two lackeys froze, faces contorting into unease. Katsuki was glaring at them, fiery red eyes flickering between the two pairs of scared ones. "Would you shut the fuck up about Deku?" The boy snapped, turning in his seat in order to stick his feet out into the aisle while one hand gripped the back of his chair. Mori shuffled back, his hands raised nervously. "Whoa, man, chill out. I was just asking if you heard about—" "Of course I fucking heard about it. It's all I'm hearing about." The ashy blonde spat, letting off a few pops between his fingers that charred the back of his seat. His grip tightened on the chair, nails digging into the wood as if he was trying to dig through it. He didn't understand why Izuku, of all people, was causing him to get this worked up, but he couldn't help it. Katsuki thought that once the nerd was no longer a part of his life, it would be quiet. He wouldn't have to listen to barely concealed mutters, rants about unachievable dreams, or how a useless piece of shit would become the first quirkless hero. But he was wrong. The only difference was, now, the noise was his own. His head was louder than it used to be, filled with thoughts and memories of his relationship with Deku. In all honesty, it was torture. Before the nerd went missing, the only time he crossed the blonde's mind was when he was being a nuisance. But beyond that, nothing. Now, it was filled with nothing more than the green-haired boy. Katsuki kept thinking about the last time he saw the nerd, the last time he heard the other boy speak, and their last interaction. For some reason, the memories caused his heart to plummet into his stomach. "Come on, Kuro," Tesakai said, while both breaking Katsuki's train of thought and placing a hand on his classmate's shoulder. Clearly, he's getting pissed off by just us talking. Might as well not stand here any longer just to get yelled at. Mori nodded, giving the explosive boy in front of him an almost worried look, before turning to follow Nagai. Katsuki grit his teeth, anger bubbling up once more at the gaze. He was getting really tired of seeing that look from everyone. Shifting in his seat, he pulled his hands off the back, although he had to tug his fingers out of the print he carved into the wood. His torso faced forwards once more, and idly, he cupped his injured hand in his other, allowing his gaze to dart down towards it. Splinters stuck out of his palm in various places, their sharp edges causing a dull ache to radiate from where they poked through his skin, and created gaps in his muscles that he could feel any time his fingers flexed. He must have splintered the wood when he blew it up. Carefully, he released his hand. His fingers moved, pinching the skin around one of the small pieces of wood. Pain emitted from the area. However, that only encouraged the boy to squeeze it harder. His eyes narrowed down at the appendage, as if trying to get the pain to bloom into a burning sensation. How many times had Katsuki blown up Deku's desk? Did the nerd have to pull out splinters like this as well? As his thoughts swirled, the boy allowed himself to be pulled under the sea once more. He hated the feeling of fuzz in his head, but at the moment, Katsuki wanted to understand why it was even there in the first place. So he allowed himself to drift away, the tides pushing him further away from solid land. They crashed over his body, and his ears filled up with water, drowning out any form of outside noise, until he was left with only himself and his mind. Was this what Izuku felt like when he was lost in his head? Deku stepped out of the shower, keeping his gaze on the foggy mirror to avoid looking at the cuts lining his forearms. The air of the small room brushed against him, the moisture and cool air permeating his skin and sending a chill to his bones. Water droplets trailed their way down his body, falling to the floor as he padded over to the sink. Once he was within range of the counter, he reached. The boy's skin felt tight around his arms, the stitches straining as the muscles in his wrists flexed, wrapping his unsteady fingers around the new pair of clothes. The dark fabric of the button-up was smooth, the collar stiff as it sat on the top of the folded shirt. There wasn't a crease in sight, a sterile perfection Izuku both loved and hated. The shirt looked like it should have the scent of a clothing store. Instead, there was the strong aroma of fabric softener, the telltale sign that it had just been washed. Sure, the child should be grateful to have something other than a white pair of shorts and a t-shirt to wear, but the sight of the formal attire was unfamiliar. It made him uncomfortable, his skin crawling with unease. He didn't want to have his own clothes here. The white hospital outfit was one thing. After all, anyone could wear it. However, these clothes were tailored to him, made for him. The boy wanted to be able to wear t-shirts with labels completely unrelated to the item, to wear outfits that his mother snorted at, not wear something that made him feel regulated. Having his own clothes made him feel trapped more than he already was. However, no matter how hard the child wanted that feeling to disappear, to evaporate into nothing more than a speck in the shipwreck of his emotions, deep down, the boy knew that that feeling was true. After all, he was controlled. Shaking the thought from his head, Izuku slipped his fingers between the folds of the shirt, letting the neat fabric unfurl. The shirt slipped open, long black sleeves falling to the torso's sides. Viridian eyes once again took in the sheer perfection of the item, before they drifted to the buttons. The more he stared at the dark fabric, the more static licked at the corners of his vision. It buzzed in his head, trying to lull the child in with its deceiving call. The voice reached out to grab him, its arms gentle yet confining. Despite how much it tried to chain Izuku within the binds of his mind, he held onto reality with desperation, his knuckles white and palms raw. He wouldn't allow himself to lose the game of tug-of-war waged between himself and his mind, no matter how loud his body screamed out for it, for release. Gingerly, Izuku's fingers pushed between the gaps created by the buttons and tugged them loose. The shirt slowly opened, the fabric inviting him in with no second thought. He carefully pushed one arm into the long sleeve, the fabric burning against his skin the more he traveled through the tunnel. The fibers scraped against his stitches, trying to attach to them like Velcro. They felt foreign under his skin, the small threads that kept his body together feeling invasive and far too prominent than he was comfortable. The boy shuddered, looking down at his concealed arm. The limb had a slight tremble to it, causing the fabric to shift against his skin uncomfortably. Izuku cringed at the feeling, his nerves burning with each minuscule movement. After all, the fabric was like sandpaper, scraping against the rough skin around his forearms. With one swift movement, the child unbuttoned the cuff of the shirt, looking away as he did. He used only his sense of touch to guide the sleeve just above his elbow, rolling the fabric carefully as he did. Once he finished, he took a moment to breathe. His lips were slightly parted, both inhaling and exhaling in short pants. Sure, the cold air was providing the wounds on his arms some form of relief, but it also made it harder to breathe. Focusing back in on getting dressed, Izuku slipped his arm into the other sleeve, repeating the process of rolling it up to his elbow. Once done, the green-haired child painfully buttoned up the fabric. With each flex of his fingers, pain shot up his arms. It only lasted a moment, but with the constant strain pulsating in his degrading muscles, it felt like a lifetime. He looked back at the other clothes laid out for him. A black bow tie, dark jeans, and a leather belt. Once the last button was set into place. His mouth pressed into a line before, begrudgingly, Deku finished getting ready, pulling on the rest of the clothes provided for him. However, the tie was left untouched. The lawn fabric slipped between the collar but left to dangle in its confines. Izuku didn't know how to tie one, and quite frankly, he didn't want to upset Overhaul with whatever abomination he would come up with. Not to mention, the boy didn't know if his hands would cooperate with him long enough to even get the knot to appear. Looking towards the door of the bathroom, he debated staying. The more he lingered in the small space, the longer he didn't have to follow the villain's demands. However, Izuku knew that if he took too long, Death would be upset. So he reached a trembling hand towards the knob. The metal bit into his skin, the item somehow warm in the cool space. It soothed the ache in his limbs, and for a moment, the child forgot about the danger lurking behind the shut door. However, reality slowly seeped back into his brain, and he turned the handle, the click of the opening door reverberating through his bones. The image of an empty room that the boy was expecting was replaced by one filled with Henkaji Tenkai, the man that had been replenishing his bandages over the past few days. While Izuku felt almost safer around this man, there was always the lingering thought in the back of his mind that reminded Izuku that he was a villain, one that worked for Overhaul, even if he didn't act like it. Henkaji was calm and patient with Deku. He never got mad or forcibly grabbed him, just waited for the boy to make up his own mind on if he would trust the man enough to let him get close. It was reassuring to the child, oddly calming to know that at least one person in the compound wasn't going to kill him if he didn't immediately obey an order. The villain looked at the kid in front of him, gesturing for him to sit down on the nearby mattress. Deku took in the movement of his hand, blinking slowly, before making his way over to the bed. The metal frame creaked under his weight, the weak springs underneath dipping ever so slightly. Without a word, Tengai crouched in front of Izuku, holding out his hand to the child with his palm facing up. Meanwhile, the man's head turned to the side, eyes landing on the medical supplies he had prepared beforehand. Viridian eyes stared at the hand, taking in the rough calluses that only hard work could create, before placing his own arm, forearm up, within the man's grasp. The villain's right hand wrapped around the child's slender arm, while his other brought the bandages close. Izuku, on the other hand, was already averting his gaze, not wanting, for even a second, to catch a glimpse of the stitches that lined the soon-to-be scar. Keeping his gaze off of the wound didn't mean that he couldn't feel it, though. With every pass over with the bandages, they hugged his arm tighter, the soft material pressing against the bruises on his arms ever so slightly. The pain wasn't overwhelming, though. It was grounding, even, keeping Izuku within the world around him rather than stuck in his head. Thoughts still floated throughout his mind, drifting to the forefront before back once more. They bounced off other ideas in the crowded space. One thought lingered, though, shoving the others away. His life outside the compound. The child wondered what time it was. It had been so long since he'd seen the sun. Whether he'd be in school or at home, what his mother or Kachan would be doing. And suddenly, the black hole in his head grew, violently dragging him away from the outside world. Memories erupted without being called forth. Some about his childhood, others about his future. The boy wondered what he could have done to prevent being captured, what he should have done differently. Maybe if he had gone to the heroes first with his analyses, rather than trusting random strangers, he would be at UA right now. Suddenly, his mind grinded to a halt. UA. If the child couldn't get his freedom back, how would he attend the school? Could he even still attend? After all, he had helped villains, is helping villains. But they'd understand, though, right? The feeling of something trailing down Izuku's cheeks yanked him back into reality, and suddenly, the tight feeling in his nose became noticeable. The boy blinked, vision blurring as his eyelids squeezed out tears. He sniffled, the breath he wheezed choppy and harsh. He wasn't entirely sure why he was crying, but for some reason, he couldn't stop. Henkaji's eyes darted up as his hands moved to grab the boy's other arm. His fingers wrapped around the trembling limb, holding it firmly in place as he meticulously bandaged up the wound. The pressure from the wrap gave Izuku something to focus on once more, and this time, he didn't allow his mind to drift. He kept it anchored, desperately clawing onto his hold on the real world. The room stayed quiet, only the occasional sob or crack in Deku's voice cutting through the silence. That silence lingered, even as the villain finished Izuku's first aid and cleaned up, after the door clicked shut behind him and the boy was left alone. Eventually, Deku shifted, allowing his head to duck and his hands to trace up his arms. His eyes caught on the neatly tied bow around his neck, and distantly, he wondered if the man tied it. As his hands moved, he made sure to be careful around the dents in his skin, ensuring that his fingers didn't dip into them. However, when they got past the crevices and to his elbows, he allowed his nails to dig into bandaged flesh. Agony radiated across his limbs, causing his muscles to reflexively tense. They begged the child to relax his grip, to let go. But he didn't listen, only tightening his hold in response. A sob racked his body, jerking it slightly as he hiccuped. His nerves burned, the tears rolling down his face, coming in small waves. The water retreated slowly, allowing the child a moment of tranquility. However, the calm was rattled with pain, a phantom ache that burned deep within his bones, waiting for the wave to draw back in. Once it did, his agony increased. It felt as if acid was being pushed through his veins, burning through the microscopic tunnels. The liquid then seeped into his bones, laying on the surface. The pain was strong, the damp feeling that was left on the corners of his eyes weighing them down. It pulled, urging the boy's eyes to close. And listening to the call, he let them flutter shut. How badly did his decision to help people ruin his future? Alright, everybody, that concludes Part 12, Chapter 12 of Susurrus of the Subdued, SOS. I might change my uploading schedule for this fic, honestly, to be every 2 weeks rather than every week. So I would just be uploading one Saturday, skip the next Saturday, and then upload the next Saturday. Because I burnt myself the fuck out and I need a break. Not to mention, I started taking the neighbor's dog on walks, so that is taking up some of my time. And then I also have some other, more personal stuff that I don't really feel comfortable sharing going on. I'm probably just going to change it until I get my, burnout gone. When I do, I'll let you guys know, because I'll start uploading every week again. But the schedule change is probably going to happen again when school starts up, because med school, and it's painful. But anyways, please make sure to check out the Discord if you haven't already. If you'd like to get updates easier, get connected with people within the fanfiction community, make requests for a podfic, and more. The link to the server will be in the description. Now, I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for listening.